This is my 50th episode. Hello and welcome back to a Squirrel Plays. Today we're going to be talking about something strange. I don't really have a point to make on this one, but really a question to ask you. I'd love to get the opinions of the TTRPG big brains, such as Professor Dungeon Master and DM Scotty or Bob the World Builder and all those, because I think that would be pretty interesting, but we'll just have to settle for mine for now. And just what are we getting in opinions and thoughts on? Not the future of TTRPGs as a whole, or really what they may evolve into, but something they might create instead. And I know that might be a little bit contradictory to the thumbnail, but just hear me out because I'm struggling to put this into concise words. Essentially, you have the tabletop world of RPGs and the video game world of RPGs, right? On the tabletop side of things, you got things like EZD6, Mouse Ritter, Tricube Tales, Break, and just even Dungeons & Dragons. Then on the video game side, you have things like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Dragon Age, Elder Scrolls, and EDF. Okay, maybe not that last one, I just like shooting space bugs. But what I'm getting at is that there is a gap in here. I think there's a third type of game, or RPG specifically, that goes right about here. And the first thing that comes to mind is a VRPG for virtual RPG, but I'm pretty sure that won't work. We already have virtual tabletops, and that's not quite what I'm referring to. And with VR coming along the way it is, it doubly so doesn't work, so I don't know what to call it. But I can try to explain what I mean. So let's start off by looking at the tabletop side of things. Tabletop, in what I suppose you could call its purest form, or basic state maybe, is friends gathering at the table with snacks and character sheets. They might have a map, they might have some minis, or they might not have either one. They might just use a pretzel to represent their character, and that one knot in the table is actually the kingdom of golden acorns that you are venturing towards. Lots of theater of the mind at work, and arguably a more personal experience as the people are right there with you in your own home. No screens, no microphones, no cameras, just friends, snacks, and good times. Then you have a couple different flavors of playing on a computer through the power of the interwebs. One is something like Tabletop Simulator. It's very much in the name in that it simulates, or at least the best that it can, playing on a tabletop. You play in a virtual space and click and drag to move tokens and dice around. I've played in it a couple times, and it's probably about as close as you can get to the tabletop experience from a computer without getting into virtual reality. It's fun and has an enjoyable clunky feel to it, but provides a few benefits that traditional tabletop doesn't, such as being able to play with your friend on the other side of the world, the ability to have as many dice as you want, as well as pulling in tokens whenever you need instead of grabbing a random Dorito. And of course, you can flip the table and not have to clean it up. And while Tabletop Simulator does offer the ability to automate some things, I do feel like it's a bit harder to set up and generally not worth the effort since it takes away from the Tabletop Simulator part of it, if you catch my drift. Then if you go a little farther down the line, you have virtual tabletops, or VTTs. These would include things like Roll20, which I'm sure more people are familiar with, or something that's far superior on every front, like Foundry. These tend to stick to the top-down 2D approach for a more simplified look, as well as easier system requirements. A big advantage to this is this allows them to be more focused. Tabletop Simulator is for anything that plays on the table, whether that's an RPG, Yahtzee, or chess, that's entirely up to you. VTTs, on the other hand, focus on RPGs. A little while back, I joined Avenue Studios for a Pathfinder game and was completely blown away with everything that Foundry was handling automatically. There were special effects being animated on the tokens, status afflictions were automatically applied, and it could even tell when an enemy token was surrounded by players and would automatically trigger a player's sneak attack ability if they had it.
You are now restrained as he collapses his long claws around you.
Oh no,
this is some bull! Really, really neat stuff, or at least I think anyway, but this is where things get a bit fuzzy and we start to see a divide amongst the players. Old school TTRPG players, such as Professor Dungeon Master, or at least from what I've heard him say in his videos, are way more interested in playing in person. Being with friends is the bigger part of the experience, not the bells and whistles the game has to offer. And that's not just old school players either. There's plenty of younger folks right here in the Squirrel community that hold a similar opinion. While they do play online plenty and use things like Roll20 and Foundry, they will readily agree that playing in person just can't be beat. It provides a very unique and special experience. And a lot of you know this already, but for those who don't, I, the Squirrel, have never had such an experience. Mostly because I wasn't exposed to the world of TTRPGs until much, much later in life, and the fact that I lived out in the boonies and D&D was considered devil worship when I was a child. That said, I can definitely understand what they mean, and I don't discredit it at all. In-person and online have their advantages and disadvantages, but there's another divide that happens among the players when you get into the digital side of things. If you recall the Pathfinder game I mentioned just a minute ago, I said there were a lot of things being automated. Some people see that and say, that's too video gamey. As cool as I think the automation is, I can understand and get behind what they're saying. Some of the automation can get so intense in Foundry that it might not be a bad idea to ask yourself, well, wait a minute, why don't I just go play a video game? Part of the beauty of TTRPGs is making things up as you go, right? Oh, the BBEG critted 3 times in a row. No, he totally didn't do that. He actually slipped. That's right, he slipped and missed that last strike. You totally have another shot at him. Don't mess it up, Krig. Or, on the other hand, a player who has been hiding during an entire bar fight decides they want to jump out in the middle of it, but do it completely naked and swing across the chandelier so they can cause mass confusion. You can't automate that. That's where the beauty of tabletop comes in. If you can imagine it, you get to do it, and you can also balance things on the fly. But what if, and this is the big question of the whole video, what if instead of trying to take pieces from video games and putting them into a TTRPG, or the other way around, what if we just took a step from TTRPGs towards video games and tried something completely new? And the whole reason this came up is because I was working on this new tool that calls itself a world builder / VTT called RPG Stories. Brave Alice Games was kind enough to provide me with a key in exchange for a review, and yes, it seems really cool and I've enjoyed building in it so far. It's pretty darn fun. But I'd be a big old fibber if I said it didn't feel pretty video gamey while I was messing around with it. And that's what got me thinking. Why couldn't it be more like a video game? Instead of taking things like Dungeons and Dragons and trying to make them more modern and immersive with things like 3D maps and models while sticking to the old concepts of character sheets and dice, why not just commit to the new environment? If character sheets and dice are what you like in a TTRPG, then something like this probably isn't going to be what you're drawn to. But if telling a story and making your own adventures are the parts of that you like, what if we made something new? What if we had a 3D dungeon the players could walk around in and explore like a video game? What if they walked up to a spike trap and instead of rolling a d20 to see if their character remembered how to jump, they instead had a minigame pop up where the needle slides up and down the bar and they have to time it just right? Or maybe their character can just jump at the push of a button and its jump height is based off its stats. What if they stumble across some goblins the GM has placed? The goblins move and attack on their own, and the GM can sit back with a bucket of popcorn and watch to see if anyone survives his dungeon. He could have the power to manually override things when need be, but only if it needs to be. Is it a TTRPG? Well, no, absolutely not. Is it a video game? Not quite. But it shares traits from both to make something entirely new. Call it a virtual RPG, video RPG, or whatever you want. I think it's something that should be explored instead of trying to cling to TTRPGs while simultaneously trying to force them into something else that they were never made for. It's not entirely a new concept. There's an older game called Fight the Dragon that was all about creating levels and sharing it for other players to adventure through, but it lacked a GM's influence while playing. Shoot, even Mario Maker lets you make levels with all kinds of traps and other unfortunate things. Rip Mario Maker. But again, no GM control during play. And that's what would be the trick. Now, I do believe Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 have something close to what I'm talking about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're fairly locked into that game's rules. While you can make maps and some traps and place different enemies, I'm not sure how much control a GM gets while you're playing. All that to say, I believe this concept is doable, and I'm curious as to why nobody has really fully leaned into it to try it yet, and I'm curious as to what all of you think. What do you think the pros and cons would be? Why do you think it hasn't been attempted yet, or has it, and I've just completely missed it? And no, this isn't a probe to measure interest so I can start a Kickstarter. I don't have the abilities to make such a tool. It's just something I was wondering about and thought it was pretty interesting. I was also really curious what the rest of the community's thoughts were on this. And that brings us to the shout out. This time it goes to JJ Perry. As of recording this, he plans to run a game of Crown and Skull this weekend, which I'm going to get to be a part of. That also means by the time this video actually comes out, that will have already come and gone. But hey, you remember how I said once my campaign was over, I'd be able to start getting into more games with y'all? Well, here I am doing the thing. I'm sticking to my squirrely word. I'm looking forward to it, and here's hoping we all have, or I guess had by the time this comes out, a good time. And that's it. Tell me your thoughts of this squirrely idea of a game system or tool or new concept that falls between TTRPGs and video games. Squirrel out!